Hello, and welcome to Making Creativity Pay, the podcast where we talk to people in creative industries about how they promote and market their work. I'm Dan Barnett, and on this episode we'll be speaking to Miriam Attwood of Storytelling PR. We talk about what having an activism and representation-focused PR company means, Miriam's extensive experience at the Edinburgh Fringe, including running PR for Summerhall, one of the venues at Edinburgh, and some thoughts on what those without PR representation can do to get themselves noticed.
So Storytelling PR is an Edinburgh-based PR company, and we tend to say company because agencies have a whole different set of connotations. Although we don't stop people if they call us an agency, but we feel we're a company. And we've been running for about 10 years now. You know, the overarching ethos of storytelling hasn't been about how long we're doing things or being showy at PR. It's always been more about direct artist work. So as long as it's relevant for us to work in kind of circles of activism, focusing on feminism, equality, trans rights, Black POC, and kind of minoritized voices. And, you know, a lot of that is emerging artists. We've kind of built the company around ensuring those voices have access to good PR. And one of the big things is kind of in terms of storytelling is like holding the door open, because I feel like once someone's held the door open to you and explained how the machine works, everything feels a bit more different.
Yeah. And so was that something from day one? You know, the activism was at the core of what you wanted to do, or were you kind of involved in PR first and then thought, well, this is the direction I want to take it in?
A very good question. I think most activists will tell you that they realize they're an activist after they've started doing it. So for me, having worked in the Fringe office directly and then having worked in different arts organisations across Scotland, having worked individually with companies kind of as a pal when I had full-time jobs elsewhere, just kind of navigating the Fringe with them. And then as storytelling, I was hired to look after Summerhall 100 years ago. And I didn't think of it as activism. I thought it as trying to do things in a new way that maybe isn't new, that I hadn't seen happening enough. You know, overarching kindness, whether that's with another PR rep or with a company that you're not directly working with. You know, the mantra in the Summerhall press office has always been very much, you're welcome here. And we've always extended that to artists who aren't in Summerhall. So, you know, if we have someone dropping in with a pal who's like, there isn't this space for me at my venue, then it's like, come and make a cup of tea. It doesn't have to be anything to do with press, just come and be in this space. And that very much slotted in with the values of a lot of the team working at Summerhall as well. It just kind of morphed into something more specific that underwrites how we work. You know, very much started with saying, I don't know, I don't think this is kind of show I'd like to go see. It doesn't seem to have the feminist values that I think are important, which, as we all know, are just equality, just an equal platform. And then it kind of changed more into, you know, a more direct activism and support for trans artists, for Black POC, queer artists, for people being able to describe their own experience in their own words and say no to press as much as saying yes, to say, actually, I only want to be interviewed by people who look like me, or it's really important that this is represented in my campaign, or actually, we don't want to work with an agency that's currently all white. Who can you recommend? And then I go, I completely understand. Here are some great networks for you to get into to find the right PR who understands this work. So it's. I think I've only realized the kind of the breadth of the activism in recent years, but it's just kind of my driver, really. It was a long answer.
No, that's great. That's great. Looking through your list, one of the people you've got is Stu Goldsmith, who's actually, he's my first guest. I mean, luckily, you know, I've only done about 19 episodes now, but I think he was 3 of the first 5. So he was great with his time. You know, I'd have him on every week if I could. He's, you know, kind of really interesting guy. He does, you know, lots of different things. And obviously his is around climate change, which is very much all these kind of things are very much of the moment, you know, but, you know, it's certainly coming up. I mean, how much, when you're doing a show like that or you know, any of your other shows, how much do you lead on the activism and how much is almost, it's a good show, it's a great show, and you learn something without necessarily it being front and center? It's almost kind of, it sinks in by osmosis rather than this is a show where you will learn or we will tell you about X.
So I would say directly on Stu and working with Stuart Goldsmith, who has such an incredible rep for supporting comedy and being, you know, a reliable, brilliant, very funny stand-up over a long time at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. I think he's on his 29th Fringe this year. If Stu's management had emailed me and said, do you want to work with Stuart Goldsmith? I would have said no, because we don't work with stand-ups, but partly because I just find the comedy industry too cutthroat. And it's so competitive. And I think there's something about theatre and performance art and cabaret that it enables more room to breathe somehow. And that might just be because I come from a theatre background. But they emailed about Stuart and Nabil Abdul Rashid, who I was a massive fan of from Britain's Got Talent in 2020. He was an absolute breath of fresh air in terms of a political comedian, but also in terms of the Britain's Got Talent format. And my husband and I were obsessed with him and still are. And Nabil knows that. So I said, well, I'd love to chat to Nabil. And I don't know if Stu's really for me. And the team, his management said he's actually doing a show about climate change and climate anxiety. Would you be interested in meeting him? And at that point, I was like, I'm in. And I think it's nice because in various interviews in the lead up to the festival, Stuart said, I'm not an activist. And I think that's partly because of all the connotations with the word activism and climate activism. But what completely draws me to working with Stu is his verve and his dedication to telling a story. And at the moment, and I think his plan is actually for a good wee while, possibly forever, is to use his stand-up spaces to talk about climate change, the climate crisis, his personal reactions to it, broader reactions to it. And that I find very exciting. And I think, you know, like smashing my way into the comedy circles, I can see the responses when I'm chatting to colleagues who are comedy writers saying, Stu's doing what? You know, and everyone uses the Comedian podcast for their research. So everyone knows Stu's voice. So it's been really interesting there relaying those conversations and no one quite knowing what box to put him in. But I think we're getting into our stride now, and Stuart's been writing a lot for magazines and newspapers about what the show means. And I think it's really going to kick off when we get to the festival. But yeah, you have to ask Stu and I at the end of the festival if we want to work together again, or if he feels like this is a self-PRing thing once he's, you know, I think it's a bit of an experiment for us both. And I guess the joy in what we do at storytelling is being able to have that conversation openly and say, like, I'm not a shouty, scary comedy PR, but I'm very impressed with what you're trying to do here. Let's do it together, you know, in terms of getting that message out there.
So from an outsider's point of view, you know, my impression of what PR is and this kind of thing would be getting an interview in a particular newspaper and, you know, getting an invite onto a radio show and that kind of stuff. I mean, how much of it is that and how much of it has changed over the last few years?
When I started out, it was a lot more about the nationals. I mean, I think I started at the Fringe the last year. The Guardian did a daily handout of Fringe listings, which seems absolutely extraordinary now, but should very much still be a thing. I think the big shift is I used to be quite snobby about the quality, for me personally, and how that intersects with all the press that's available. I used to be quite snobby about the quality that I was expecting people to meet professional work at. But as soon as I spotted a good writer, you know, like Matt Truman, who's become a friend, who is a theatre writer, I was like, Matt's amazing, get him in. I want him to write about everything. And I think discovering, you know, Arusa Qureshi, who's the editor of Fest magazine, when Arusa first interviewed one of my clients, Courtney Act, I was like, wow, you're such a brilliant writer. And we've become friends. But I was like, I don't care at what stage of your career you're at. I want to get you in to see stuff. So I think there are two things at play in terms of how things have changed. One, it is much easier to set up a blog or a Twitter account and say that you're covering the festival and you need accreditation and you need free tickets. And I still take that with a pinch of salt. But two, the routes into a seriously challenging career as a journalist are both much broader, but the funnel's getting even tighter at the top. So it's really important for me that people that want to spend their time writing about and providing criticism or context for work are invited to do that. And I think as long as we appreciate something as criticism and it doesn't move into nastiness, which does happen with experimental work, or you know, being very judgmental or just not wanting to meet, you know, giving something 1 star and being like, it's not theatre. Well, it's not theatre on your terms.
Yeah.
and maybe we don't care about your terms.
I mean, how difficult is that sometimes to kind of match an audience? Because like you said, some things will be quite generic, like stand up to some extent, even there's different tastes and so on. But for, like you said, for more activism, for anything that's more further away from the mainstream, you want to bring some of those people from the mainstream to it, but you can't force them to enjoy it or force them to appreciate or even appreciate it.
And I think there's sometimes a joy in a well-established act getting a 2 or 3 star review from someone who's fundamentally, willfully decided not to understand it or meet its level. But in the hectic environment of the Fringe, that can be really damaging for someone who's laid their soul out, and we're not even talking about like work that involves trauma or work that involves anything like, autobiographical, just, something that you've put years into and then you've put all the money you feel like you'll ever have in that moment into, and someone comes in and goes, 1 star, I don't have an interest in meeting you at your level. That's really tough. And I think during the Fringe, we kind of say to our artists, we will do everything we can to ensure the right people are coming in and look at it from a kind of positive aspect. On the same way, if we see someone booking in for a ticket who we know only likes Proscenium March, Shakespeare, the classics, then if it's, a piece of avant-garde experimental theatre at Summerhall, then we will challenge them on that and say, why do you want to come see it? But then, sometimes we're caught out. I would go to a very well-known theatre blogging site, which traditionally is very proscenium arch theatre, thinking they shouldn't come to a show at Summerhall this summer. And I actually looked at the reviews blog of that one writer, and actually specifically he'd seen kind of performance artwork and loved it. And I was like, I didn't even know you existed. This is brilliant. Of course you can come. And I think then it leads to the fun conversation of, I don't want to stop people coming in if they're going to criticize a show. That's fine. That's criticism. Yeah. You want to kind of mitigate for people. I think the big thing is the pool at the top is shrinking. The nationals aren't doing as much. The budgets are non-existent. The interest from the writers is still in doing the creative, edgy stuff, but their editors are looking for any significant hook. If you're working with a big name, they will get covered everywhere. We're working with Gail Porter this year, and Gail has done no end of interviews. But also Gail would say, like, it's tough coming up to the festival. It's expensive. I want to share that love. And I know when she's here, she'll be shouting. She'll be doing her own PR for things she's seen or people she's run into the street and shouting them out at the end of her show. You have to try to not get too disappointed about it, because that's the nature of living in 13 years of Tory rule and, almost like a post-capitalist apocalypse at the Fringe. It's the best and worst, isn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of, yes, you've got 3,000 people. One of the other people I've spoken to previous said, it's full of people who are on, literally on the fringe generally of kind of what they do. And I think Stu has said as well, I might be misquoting him here, but we're kind of all weirdos together. And that's just kind of say, you've got all of a sudden you've got all those kind of people, but you've also got then from next year a cruise ship parking up, that's 200 quid per person per night. So it's got the best and worst of kind of what you can do with it.
Oh, the cruise ship! I mean, you said someone once went for 2 hours. I've got 24 hours on that bloody cruise ship. But yeah, and I think there are definitely some really misguided things happening in terms of the Fringe, its perception, the folk who say they run it, but at the end of the day, it's an organic beast. And I think it's an ecosystem, and within it, there will be different parts that thrive and dip on out. I don't know. But it's also it's a kind of self-fulfilling vase of creative talent, because for everyone who says I'm not doing it again, there are 20 people trying to put together their life savings to come and do it, not even as professional performers or artists, and that's ace,
But yeah, it's hard, definitely. I mean, so from a PR point of view, how hard is it to balance? You could probably go for the kind of the shock or the extreme angle of some of the people you work with to kind of get a headline, maybe get a few bums on seats, but that might then misrepresent what they do. So how do you kind of balance getting an interest versus maybe misrepresenting them?
We're just not interested. I can definitely see the temptation, but yeah, it's not for us. We've definitely worked with artists and companies who have said that they would have preferred that, just to rinse any opportunity, but very few, and the majority of our artists understand that we will take their work as it was intended. Yeah. I think that's really fundamental to us, and a really important thing to to talk about, because it's very easy to drop your ethical guard in the soup that is the Fringe. But I prefer that end of the scale where the artists are saying, this is how I want a medal, rather than the other end of the scale saying, here's your trauma story, let's mine it.
And in terms of getting people in, how difficult sometimes, because I saw on the Fringe website themselves, which it's kind of quite honest, that they kind of say a typical show will sell a third of tickets. If you sell a third of your seats, your average, you're kind of a bit normal. How difficult is it, especially if you're doing something personal, if you've put your heart and soul into it? How do you kind of manage people's expectations effectively?
I mean, it's kind of impossible to manage people's expectations at the Fringe, because everyone has that week where they completely panic, the bottom falls out. The ticket sale report is just the worst thing they've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is with the stats around the Fringe, and I would probably be to blame for making some of those up when I worked at the Fringe back in 2010, 2011, because I sat and reworked the How to Sell Your Show document, and I probably just was like, that's about right. I definitely didn't have any basis for those. I really hope the team who have updated it in the years between have, but I was just like 24, media manager, drunk all the time, just having a great time. But I was good at my job, and my drive was the artist, so I won't be too mean on myself. But I think the thing is about saying that all shows at the Fringe sell a third of their tickets is just using the median average for something like 3,000 shows where you've got professional shows, you've got, Daniel Sloss is doing 2 nights at the Playhouse. That's like 2,000 tickets. That's 4,000 tickets. I mean, that probably will almost sell out. Probably will sell out. We've got shows at Summerhall that are in 58 seaters that will win a Fringe first or get a 4 or 5 star review in The Guardian or The Scotsman, and will pretty much then sell out the rest of their run. But that's 58 tickets times 24. It's not, even 2,000 times 2. And if you're bringing a tap show from Norwich and your schools put it together and you're doing a week and you only sell 10 tickets a day, but you have a brilliant time, and 2 of the team discover that they want to go on and study acting or theatre, and another 2 decide that maybe stage management something, and they can go straight and get a vocational job at 18 in the West End. I love that. It doesn't matter that they sold no tickets, really. But the competition is huge. I think, to answer your question specifically, if a show is struggling to sell tickets, then we kind of go into a bit of an overdrive where we're pitching for people to come in and review, and we're pitching for people to talk about the show. We're seeing if there are key talking points that are popping up in other spots. We speak to other PRs and say, do you have another show that's on this theme? Could we pitch something together? Could we write something and then pitch it to the Scotsman to go in as a self-pen? And also we're doing a lot to the managing expectations is also about, we speak to all our companies about a specific set of goals they have for the festival. So that's not just press, that might be like industry, that might be, why are you doing the festival? And how can we make those goals a reality? And every time those goals are unrealistic and I don't counter them, there's a problem. And nearly every time those goals are completely realistic and we smash them, leaving with a tour booked or leaving with a plan for a load of, creative collaborations, whatever. The list is as long as all the Fringe shows stuck together. But I think managing those expectations is so important in terms of saying, what do you want to achieve? We will work to get you the coverage that match those goals. And if those goals are insane, but there is some beautiful, I'll give one very quick example, which was a company we were working with who did previews earlier in the summer in London. And my colleague Emma said, what are your goals for coverage? And they said, I don't know. I would like some black-led publications to engage with the work. I would like to engage with these community groups, but I don't really care about the broadsheets, whatever. And then a couple of weeks later, they had a similar conversation. Emma, and I wasn't in either of these, so I am completely paraphrasing, but this is something that happens a lot. And then Emma said, we've had interest from this kind of leading publication. And they were like, what, really? And it turned out actually the initial conversation had gone the way it had because they felt none of those publications would be interested in them.
Right.
So that was an opportunity for us to go, if you're interested in them seeing your work, we will tell them your work is out there and that they should come. And I think that's also a really important thing where there's been so much gatekeeping and there are so many rules and there are so many specific spaces that are structurally very designed for white middle class audiences or readers. There's a little bit of work that we all need to be doing to undo that, and part of that is saying to our artists, look, I think the work's good enough and then being pissed off with them if they don't get that recognition and it's just another set of white boy stand-ups. And again, these are all very binary, very silly examples, but I think managing expectations is basically the job of a producer and a PR at festivals. That's their number one. But I think, you never want the goals that are set to be limiting, so those expectations are easier to manage. You want to challenge yourself as well and be like, no, I agree with you. I think the show's good enough. I think it should be touring the world, and I think you should have a review in every national paper. Let's go for it. And that's kind of exciting to do that together and work on that with honesty. There might be a specific gaze that's a priority. So especially a piece of queer activism, I want queer audiences to come in and feel seen and feel heard and feel talked about. But you would also say, especially with a Fringe, whether your audience is, every single audience over 24 days will be different. So within that, you're also like, no, but I also do kind of want my like slightly problematic parent or my slightly problematic friend to come and see this and be stuck in their seat for an hour and to deal with it and to start to understand the nuance here. That's the point of art, right? So I think especially with kind of the structural makeup of the Fringe that's historically been incredibly white, and straight, there are specific ways that we would approach queer press and Black POC-led press for those specific artists. So there are conversations where they can walk in and they don't have to put up any guard. And that's really important. But we're also saying that if you do have to sit down with a person who doesn't look like you, what do we do to make sure that conversation's really easy? So it's a little bit of, it's narrowing the field, but never saying no to the rest of the field unless they're specifically problematic.
Generally, are all your acts doing the full month? Or are there some that are doing shorter runs?
The majority are doing the full month. We have a handful of shows every year that are in various showcases and platforms. So the Made in Scotland showcase, some of those performers like Andrea Baker's just doing a wee, because the remit with their funding is you need to be performing for a period of this showcase when we have our concentrated efforts on getting promoters and tour bookers and festival curators from around the world in to see you. The funny thing with the Fringe in terms of PR, and I think every PR would be nodding their head, is it doesn't matter how long the run is, the work is the same, which is mad. But actually the amount of work is the same. But, we have to counter that in terms of like how we work and what we charge. In terms of you're just selling for a week and you don't have, if you're in a specific showcase that's giving you press and marketing funds, like we will go hard as if you're here for the whole month. But also if you're doing a week because your funding's so limited, we will go hard as if you're here for the month. So, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a big shift, especially since the pandemic, in terms of venues being able to fill spaces with full runs just because the costs are so prohibitive. And it always has been a kind of the old school scales of like investment versus return. And the investment is tipping on the heavy side at the moment. It's mentioned accommodation.
Yes, I was just about to say, so that's the kind of thing that, like you said, a lot of the fixed costs are the same, your flyers, your Fringe fee and all that kind of stuff. So yes, someone on the previous episodes coming up for a week, and she said she's got one show for a week and one show for a month, and they've cost pretty much the same to kind of put on. But obviously,
the accommodation is triple.
Is the killer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess, the accommodation thing, and the people that like to say they're in power are not doing anything sensible to deal with it. They're all just fighting amongst themselves.
And I mean, with that, do you see Edinburgh becoming less important? Previous episode was with the Camden Fringe, which, is over end of July and August,
Yeah.
And I mean, especially for comedy, I don't know much for others, but there's like so many other festivals now that you could easily do the whole summer, 2 or 3 nights a week performing without having to kind of, concentrate it all in 1 month. So you could still do a day job and, and still perform, 15 times or so across July and August and kind of get your show honed, get the performance done. Do you think people will start to move away? or like you said, there's always more. There's more people want to come in.
There's always more. And like, it's interesting seeing this trend of lots of Americans coming this year, and everyone's like, it's because the exchange rate is so good. And I was like, no, it's not. It's FOMO. Everyone was locked up. Like LA and New York both had really significant lockdowns. Those are two massive creative like pools, and those were two areas where people weren't allowed to move. So if you're an LA writer or performer and you've always wanted to do the Fringe, suddenly your bucket list jumps up. So yeah, a slightly nice exchange rate is good, but also let's go and do the Fringe 2023. Yeah, let's do it. I don't know. I mean, the Fringe has changed so much since I first, visited it as a plucky 18-year-old, and I don't know what's left. I am really disappointed in some of the organisations that purport to run it. They don't seem to be doing anything serious about anti-racism, anything serious about green policy, anything serious about artist care, anything serious about accommodation, which is artist care. So who knows? But then, like, we've had a Tory government for 13 years. Maybe in 3 years in the UK, things will look completely different politically. And let's just pretend that there is a good alternative out there. But we're definitely at like the pointy end. And arts funding is, there are no overarching British funding schemes for people to bring work to the world's largest arts market, which is bats. Made in Scotland's only like 15 years old, which is bats, but it does still exist. The Horizon program is amazing, and it is very forward-looking, and it is brilliantly curated, but it only scratches at the surface. And if accommodation is going to be a line in the sand, then it doesn't just it takes away any kind of level playing field, doesn't it? So I don't know. I'll be here watching it because I don't have to pay £6 million to come to the festival. Like, I probably pay in my mortgage in a year what some people are paying for the whole festival. It's absolutely disgusting. But I have a spare room. If you've got a banging show, come and camp in my garden for free.
No, I mean, like I said, one of the previous episodes is Juliet Burton. So she's sold out shows, I think the previous 4 years she's been, but she's sleeping on a friend's couch because otherwise it's a few grand, down the drain, which, is not easy. And I think people have said, this is their holiday, instead of going on a holiday or having a bit of a break, they're putting their money into the creative work.
And like, I love going to music festivals and where you camp, but like after 4 or 5 days of like having a really great time, like I want to sleep in a comfortable bed. And I do think it's extraordinary the lengths to which we're going to ask people to perform. Like, it's getting a bit court jestery. Like, you're stepping onto stage and your makeup's perfect and your lame cape is steamed within an inch of its life, but then you have to go home and sleep in a bunk bed with your musical director. I mean, that's not cool. Like, no other industry would accept that, and it really pisses me off. I think everyone deserves better, and there's plenty of bloody money. Prince Charles could have not taken his pay rise and bankrolled the Fringe for 25 years, but I wouldn't trust the person that he'd given the money to. He should give the money to us. We will just hand it out. I'll just monzo $5,000 at a time to everyone.
So, I mean, there have been some bursaries in place, but there's probably, not a lot. I know that the Gilded Balloon are doing that. Their option, their tickets where you can kind of pay an extra £2. I don't, that's probably not going to make a huge difference, even if people took it up. But it's kind of a start in the right direction. But obviously, most people
probably buy doing the same thing.
Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to kind of see, how much of that there is, and whether, I mean, like on music, for example, I know there's a charity now or an organisation where I think £1 from every ticket for certain bands will kind of say they'll put it into, I think it's the Music Venue Trust. So it goes back towards paying for all music venues, and whether there's something in that there's almost a levy on some of the bigger shows that kind of help funnel it back to some of the others. Yes,
but then you have to look at who is the governing body who are responsible for that money. Like TikTok, Playbill, they've done these massive deals with the Fringe Society. I'm not on TikTok because I'm 100 years old in creative years, as we all are once we've done it for more than a decade, but I'm coming up for 2, But I don't think it's quite ethical for TikTok to be saying the only way you can get our money is with ad spend. I don't think it's necessarily ethical to ask an artist to have to join a platform. If they want to and they want to use that spend, I work with Ruben and he absolutely smashes it on TikTok, and he's gone viral several times just specifically on, with material on the app. Love that journey for him. But I think it is not correct to say to an artist, you need to hand over all your data to help sell some tickets. I think we just have to be better. But I think this is also a classic thing of there are some people who are being better. And I think, Summerhall Gilded Balloon, the £2 ticket scheme is great because one of the things it does is ring fences money separate from your box office. So on the 29th of September, say you've got £1,500 in there from, ticket donations, that money is immediately in your bank account. That is your rent paid for September after being away from a month. And your box office settlement won't chug through the system at the Fringe office and your venue until October. And I have had artists last year not getting their payout till January or February, which is absolutely outrageous. But yes, it's nice to add the £2 on, but what are we doing about that whole structure that's saying we're not going to be able to get your box office to you until January? I mean, surely that's the Fringe office needs to be not falling out with venues, but making sure that artists are protected. I just think the whole thing's crumbling, and there are some cool little things happening in the Ashes. And the big thing that's happening in the Ashes is a load of people still presenting work.
It's interesting, yeah. Should the Fringe almost be the ones with the big stick going round, making sure that things are done properly, or are they there as a kind of, a PR for the whole thing of what the Fringe is? Should they be a bit more, enforcing?
They should be doing both. They should be doing both, and they should be doing it from everything from an artist-led perspective. That's it. And it's not hard. I managed to pay all of my team living wage. We don't have any commercial funding. And we act on behalf of the artists. And yes, we are a commercial organisation. If the Fringe Society, for example, thinks it's a commercial organisation, Underbelly is 100% a commercial organisation. But there have to be lines and limits within those things that say if we're joining the circus and we're putting on shows at this world-leading event, then we have to treat our artists with a certain amount of care. If you want to just make money, then just do a Christmas market. I have no beef with that. But don't meddle with emerging artists. Or I feel like we're going around the houses on, not in this conversation, but at the Fringe at large, in calling out the specific structural issues that we should all be better than.
Yeah, I guess part of the problem is that it is 3,000 different groups. So with troops and everything, that's probably 5,000 different people. And to kind of, if they were all pushing the same way, then there's all sorts you could do. And I think previous years people have said, "Oh, Fringe is too commercial, I'm not going," and then all of a sudden, January comes round and it's, well, I can't miss out. And, that's probably similar to kind of most things around activism. I think a lot of things, people know what the right thing is, whether that's climate or whatever else, but to kind of actually go out of your way and do it is a far harder thing. Just to kind of finish on, so for any act who kind of doesn't have any PR and is doing everything themselves, what would be your kind of words of wisdom in terms of, how they can kind of try and cut through with the 3,000 other acts on there?
I'm so glad you've asked this because I think it's so important. I think it comes down to one thing, and that is nice, clear, honest communications. So you'll get advice that says write a press release and then send that out. A press release is handy because a well-written press release summarizes loosely what's going to happen in the room, and it also gives you the ticket prices, it gives you the time, it gives you the cast, it gives you the creative, it gives you everything you need to take things to the next level. But actually what you need to do is it's all about the emails. I wrote a thing taking the piss out of emails for the stage that they then said was just too stupid, Miriam, and I had to write something more sensible. But the classic Fringe email party, just write something really open and honest that describes what you're doing and why. I am bringing a show about my experience living in a fridge for a year. I have won these awards for my poetry. I have won these awards for my playwriting. I have, done this placement. I have been in, explain where you're at professionally and why you're bringing that work. And And I honestly know that, most of the journalists I work with, when they see something well written coming into their inbox, it doesn't matter who it's from, and I think that's kind of the main thing. So, just engage people like it's a conversation. And that doesn't mean you can't write a really brilliant paragraph and copy and paste that and send it to Broadway World and the Scotsman and Spy in the Stalls and the Wee Review, but just write something with care that describes why you're presenting work at the world's largest arts festival, what it is, why they should come. If you're on Twitter and you're reading coverage and you're up with what's going on, you might see specific writers who are focused on certain issues, and you might want to drop them a note and say, I read this thing and I really loved it. Thank you for writing that. Or I went to see this show because you wrote about it and now I want you to know about mine. But I think that's the main thing. Just pop something together that summarizes, and we get, on the flip side, we still get people emailing us saying, will you do our PR long after the books are full? And we normally end up taking on a handful more. I do. The rest of the team have much better self-restraint. I pile more load on the buckaroo. But I, do get emails where I'm like, we really have drawn the line now, and I desperately want to work out how I can support them, and I just don't have the time. But because they've written a beautiful email describing why they're doing. And I also am like, if you've managed to get my interest, you will get the interest of journalists. Keep doing this.
Does it ever quieten down after the first couple of weeks? Are the last couple a bit more your kind of job is done and, the ball is rolling and you've done all you can do? Or are you still kind of cranking things in the final week?
It completely depends. I have a feeling the Fringe for a while is only going to get worse and more, because I'm more like driven in the final week. Most of the Fringe publications wrap up with about 6 days to go in the festival, and then the final slew of awards start coming out. But it's just every year is a little bit different. I mean, in terms of like the absolute volume of ticket requests we have in the weeks leading up to the festival, we're all kind of going totally like pedal to the metal, trying to smash through them. So things like that always loosen up. But again, it depends what your goal is. If you're bringing a show for the last 10 days of the festival and you want to get reviews, and it doesn't matter if they come out, it's not about selling tickets, it's about getting a tour booked, then I'm still like on to Fergus at the stage and he's like, Miriam, I'm so tired, I can't see another show.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Miriam for being on the podcast. There's more info about Miriam, Storytelling PR and Summerhall in the show notes. If you enjoyed this, check out our other episodes where we speak to a number of performers about their experiences at the Edinburgh Fringe, as well as with creatives in other industries about making creativity pay.